Before we begin, please be advised that this story contains themes of psychological distress, isolation, and existential dread that some listeners may find unsettling. It began with a whisper, then a roar that echoed through the very fabric of the planet. Not a whisper of wind or a roar of thunder, but the sound of something impossibly ancient, impossibly vast, finally reaching its destination. On November 14th, at precisely 3:17 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, a flash brighter than 1,000 suns seared across the pre-dawn sky over the remote, desolate plains of northern Nevada. It wasn't an airplane or a satellite or even a meteor in the common sense. This was an event that shook seismographs across the globe, registered on every atmospheric sensor, and sent a ripple of bewildered awe through the scientific community. This was a rock from beyond, a wanderer from the deep void, hurtling through space for untold millennia, now carving a monumental scar into our quiet world. For an astrophysicist like David Miller, it was the kind of event that only happened in textbooks and fever dreams. He'd spent his entire career staring at distant nebulae, dissecting cosmic dust, and modeling orbital mechanics, always yearning to touch a piece of that unreachable tapestry. Now, the universe had delivered a fragment directly to his doorstep, albeit one that had cratered a vast section of the Black Rock Desert. The initial news was pure scientific euphoria, a virgin, uncatalogued meteorite, potentially massive, landing in a relatively accessible, though extremely remote, part of the United States. No major population centers threatened, just miles of sagebrush and silence. David, sharp-witted and relentless, was among the first wave of civilian specialists called in by the National Astronomical Observatory. His team's mission: preliminary assessment, sample collection, and mapping the impact zone. He remembered the drive out there, the endless ribbon of highway giving way to unmarked dirt tracks, the air growing colder and thinner with every mile. His colleague, Dr. Jessica Chan, a geologist with a dry wit and even drier sense of humor, had been humming some obscure folk song, oblivious to the gnawing exhilaration in David's gut. They were going to make history. This wasn't just a rock. It was a time capsule, a message from the cosmos. When they finally arrived, the scale of it was breathtaking. The impact site wasn't a mere hole in the ground. It was an inverted mountain range, a colossal bowl scooped out of the earth, nearly a mile in diameter, ringed by a chaotic mess of ejected soil and pulverized rock. And at its heart, glowing faintly even in the harsh desert sunlight, was it? The meteorite. It wasn't the dark, scorched lump you'd expect. It was enormous, easily the size of a small office building, and its surface shimmered with an impossible iridescent sheen that defied easy categorization. It was obsidian black in some places, yet caught the light with flashes of deep violet, emerald green, and a startling, unfamiliar crimson. David's hand instinctively went to the Geiger counter clipped to his belt. Nothing. No unusual radiation. But the air around it felt different. Thicker, perhaps. Or thinner. It was like trying to breathe water in a dream. "Well, that's not in the textbook," Jessica muttered, her usual stoicism momentarily forgotten. She was staring through her binoculars, her brow furrowed. "Looks like it's still cooling? Or heating?" David adjusted his own scope. The heat haze emanating from the meteorite wasn't a uniform shimmer. It pulsed subtly, almost imperceptibly, like a slow, deep breath. The ground beneath their feet vibrated with a low, resonant hum, a frequency so deep it felt more in their bones than their ears. It was a primal thrum that seemed to align with their own heartbeats. Their initial readings were a chaotic symphony of anomalies. The meteorite's mass was far greater than its visual size suggested, creating a localized gravitational anomaly that subtly tugged at their equipment. Its composition was an enigma. A dense matrix of silicates and iron, yes, but interwoven with elements that didn't quite fit the periodic table. New isotopes, perhaps, or something else entirely. Something that made their spectrometers hum with confusion. The strangest thing, though, was the temperature. While parts of its surface were indeed cooling, other sections registered temperatures far below anything naturally occurring in the desert. Patches of frost clung to its impossible surface, even as the sun beat down relentlessly. It was a paradox, a cosmic riddle in solid form. "Look at the flora," David said, pointing to a patch of desert brush near the crater rim. The sagebrush, usually a dusty gray-green, had taken on an unnatural, vibrant blue tint. The spines of a nearby cactus seemed to have elongated, twisting into grotesque, almost crystalline formations. Insects, usually buzzing everywhere, were eerily absent. The only sound was the wind, and that persistent low thrum. Jessica pulled out a handheld sensor, her movements precise. Atmospheric readings are fluctuating. Higher oxygen concentration than normal, but also something else. A unique electromagnetic signature. It's like the air itself is being rearranged. David felt a prickle of unease. This wasn't just a meteorite. It was a catalyst, a transformer. Over the next few days, as more scientific teams arrived, the anomalies multiplied. Electronic equipment within a quarter-mile radius of the meteorite began to falter, then outright fail. Laptops crashed, GPS signals became unreliable, and radio communications were plagued by static that sounded less like interference and more like a garbled whisper. One evening, a drone sent to get aerial scans simply dropped out of the sky, its internal diagnostics reporting total system failure. Its wreckage, oddly, showed no signs of impact, merely a complete cessation of function. The birds avoided the area entirely. Animals that occasionally ventured close, a coyote, a few desert hares, would suddenly freeze, their eyes wide and vacant, before turning and bolting away as if pursued by an unseen predator. David even saw one of the sturdy, resilient desert lizards, usually quick as lightning, simply stop moving, its scales fading to a dull, lifeless gray. Then came the dreams. Not everyone experienced them, but David certainly did. Vivid, unsettling dreams of geometric patterns shifting in impossible dimensions, of colors he'd never seen, and a profound, overwhelming sense of being observed. He'd wake up in a cold sweat, the low thrum of the meteorite still echoing in his head, feeling utterly drained, yet strangely alert. The initial scientific excitement slowly began to curdle into something else, a collective, unspoken anxiety. The meteorite wasn't just a scientific marvel. It was a profound unknown, an alien presence that seemed to be subtly rewriting the rules of reality around it. And then the military arrived. Not a few jeeps and a couple of officers, but a full-scale, rapid deployment. Humvees, armored personnel carriers, even a few black helicopters that seemed to materialize out of the desert haze. They came with a grim efficiency, establishing an immediate, aggressive perimeter, pushing out all non-essential personnel. The scientific teams, including David and Jessica, were abruptly informed that their services were no longer required. "This is highly irregular," David protested to a stone-faced Colonel Hayes, a man whose eyes held a permanent glint of suspicion. "We're specialists. We need to continue our observations." "Your observations are complete, Dr. Miller," Hayes had replied, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "This is now a matter of national security." As David was escorted away, his mind raced. National security? For Iraq? He knew enough about classified projects and covert operations in Nevada to understand the implication. They weren't just securing the impact site, they were concealing it. They were isolating it. And they were isolating them. He glanced back one last time at the shimmering, impossible object in the crater. The hum was still there, a low, resonant frequency that seemed to vibrate in his very core. He saw a faint, almost imperceptible pulse of that strange crimson light emanate from its surface, briefly illuminating the newly erected military tents. And for a fleeting, terrifying moment, David Miller didn't feel like he was leaving a scientific discovery behind. He felt like he was escaping something that hadn't just arrived on Earth, something that had been activated. And he had a chilling, unshakable feeling that whatever it wasn't done with us yet. Michael Thorne drove, the desolate highway stretching before him like a dark ribbon unraveling into the unknown. His heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs, a drumbeat of pure adrenaline and paralyzing fear. He hadn't slept in days, fueled only by cheap coffee and the gnawing certainty that he had made the only choice he could: to run, to abandon everything he had worked for, every scientific principle he held dear, to escape the chilling truth of what they had unearthed. The image of it, Object 734, burned behind his eyelids, a dark, silent monolith, yet pulsing with an unseen, unheard energy that had rewritten everything he thought he knew about the universe. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, knuckles white. The desert night pressed in around him, vast and indifferent, a stark contrast to the claustrophobic terror that clung to him. He was escaping, yes, but the question that gnawed at him was from what? The Global Planetary Institute, the powerful organization that now sought to control the anomaly? Or the anomaly itself, which he suspected was no longer confined to the depths of their secure lab. It had all started with such intoxicating promise. The initial reports from the deep space probe had been astounding. An asteroid fragment, rich in unique isotopes, veering off course and predicted to impact a remote, uninhabited region of the Nevada desert. A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Dr. Michael Thorne, lead astrobiologist at the GPI, had practically vibrated with excitement. His team, including the brilliant but always skeptical Dr. Jessica Riley and the meticulously pragmatic Dr. David Chun, had been assembled with military precision. The impact site was a crater of raw alien beauty. The air shimmered with residual heat, and the desert floor was scarred by the meteorite's violent arrival. They'd found it quickly, a dark, jagged behemoth half buried in the sand, radiating an unsettling cold even in the scorching sun. It wasn't just a rock. It was pristine, almost perfectly preserved, unlike any extraterrestrial material Michael had ever studied. Its surface, a dull obsidian, seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, hinting at a depth that defied simple geology. Back in the GPI's secure underground lab, the initial scans were perplexing. Object 734 defied conventional classification. Its elemental composition was bizarre, featuring isotopes never before observed on Earth, and some that simply shouldn't exist in such stable forms. "It's a geological impossibility," Jessica had murmured, her brow furrowed in concentration, as she reviewed the spectroscopic data, like it was forged in a different universe, under impossible conditions. But the real strangeness began when they attempted to extract a sample. Standard laser ablation techniques failed. Diamond-tipped drills shattered against its impossible density. It was impossibly resilient. David, always the pragmatist, suggested increasing the energy output. "We need to get inside it, Michael. This isn't just a rock. It's a puzzle box and we have to open it." Michael hesitated. There was something about Object 734 that felt sentient. A faint, almost imperceptible hum emanated from it, a low frequency that vibrated deep in his bones, making the hair on his arms stand on end. He dismissed it as equipment noise, lab fatigue. But the hum persisted, a subtle rhythmic pulse that seemed to deepen when they brought certain resonant frequencies near it. It was Emily, a young technician responsible for environmental controls, who first noticed the anomaly on the thermal imaging. A faint, internal heat signature pulsing, not residual heat from impact, but something originating from within the object itself. It was barely above ambient temperature, but it was there, undeniable, a silent heartbeat in the heart of the alien rock. Michael remembered the moment vividly. They had finally managed to create a microscopic fissure using a focused sonic beam, a method David had stubbornly insisted upon. As the first microscopic dust motes drifted into the sterile air of the containment chamber, Michael felt a sudden sharp pain behind his eyes, a momentary disorientation. He blinked, shaking his head, trying to clear the sudden fog. Then the hum intensified. It wasn't just in his bones now, it was in the air, a low thrum that vibrated the very molecules around them. The internal heat signature on the monitor spiked, a rapid, almost instantaneous rise in temperature that made the emergency alarms blare, a jarring mechanical shriek that shattered the lab's pristine silence. "Shut it down!" Jessica yelled, her voice strained over the sudden din, her eyes wide with alarm. "Seal the chamber. It's destabilizing." But it wasn't destabilizing. It was waking up. Through the reinforced glass, Michael watched, transfixed, as the fissure in Object 734 began to expand. Not with violence or explosion, but with a slow, deliberate bloom, like a strange dark flower unfurling. From the widening crack, a faint iridescent light began to seep, a hue unlike any he had ever seen. A shimmering spectrum of deep violets and unsettling greens that seemed to shift and writhe, pulsing with an inner life. And then a sound. Not the hum, but something else entirely. A whisper, impossibly soft, yet it seemed to fill the entire lab, bypassing the soundproofing, penetrating directly into his mind. It wasn't words, not in any language he knew, but a complex tapestry of tones and vibrations that conveyed an undeniable sense of presence. An ancient, vast, and utterly alien intelligence. The alarms continued to scream, but no one moved. David stood frozen, his face pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and utter disbelief. Jessica clutched her head, wincing as if in sudden, intense pain. Michael felt it too. The whisper was growing, becoming a chorus, a symphony of alien thought. It wasn't just a sound. It was information, sensation, something being transmitted directly into their consciousness. Images flashed through his mind. Not of Earth, not of stars, but of impossible geometries, vast cosmic distances, and a profound, terrifying loneliness that stretched across eons. He saw, or rather felt, the object's journey. Not just across space, but across unimaginable stretches of time. It wasn't merely a fragment that arrived. It was a vessel, a seed. And they, in their scientific arrogance, their insatiable curiosity, had provided the catalyst for its germination. They had awakened it. The iridescent light pulsed brighter, casting eerie shadows across the faces of his colleagues, painting them in alien hues. The air in the chamber grew heavy, charged with an invisible energy that prickled his skin. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The light receded, the fissure closed, the hum faded, and the whispers ceased. The alarms, still blaring, sounded deafening in the sudden void of the alien presence. Object 734 sat inert once more, a dark, silent monolith. But it was different. Michael knew it. He could feel it. The inert rock had been transformed. It was no longer just a meteorite. It was a conduit, a receiver, and now perhaps a transmitter. The GPI authorities, led by the stern and unyielding Dr. Evelyn Reed, descended upon the lab within minutes. The official explanation for the alarm was a containment breach simulation gone awry. Michael and his team were debriefed, then debriefed again, their memories meticulously catalogued. They were told to forget what they thought they saw, what they thought they heard. Object 734 was reclassified, placed under even tighter security protocols, its true nature now a state secret, locked away behind layers of bureaucratic jargon and armed guards. But Michael couldn't forget. The whispers, the images, they lingered at the edges of his consciousness, a constant, unsettling hum beneath the surface of his thoughts. He started having vivid, disturbing dreams. Not nightmares exactly, but visions of cosmic scale, of intricate patterns forming and dissolving in the void. He saw other things too, things that made his blood run cold, glimpses of Earth but subtly altered, subtly wrong. He tried to talk to Jessica, to David. Jessica seemed shaken, quieter, more withdrawn, but she dismissed his concerns as stress. We were all on edge, Michael. The sonic resonance probably played tricks on our minds. David, ever pragmatic, had grown distant, almost cold. He spoke only of containment, integrity, and minimizing data leakage. Michael suspected David was either genuinely convinced it was an anomaly, or had been persuaded. Michael knew the truth. Object 734 had not just arrived on Earth. It had been dormant, a seed waiting for the right conditions. And their scientific curiosity, their relentless pursuit of knowledge, had provided those conditions. They had activated it. And the chilling part was, he sensed it wasn't just the object itself that had changed. Something in them, in him, had changed too. The whispers had left an imprint. He started noticing subtle shifts in his own perception, a heightened awareness of patterns, an intuitive understanding of complex systems he hadn't possessed before. It was like a piece of his brain had been rewired, humming with new alien data. He saw the world with new eyes, and what he saw filled him with dread. He saw vulnerabilities, points of entry, pathways for something vast and ancient to unfold. The GPI wasn't just containing an object. They were trying to contain an idea, a presence. And they were failing. He saw the subtle changes in the lab, the way certain technicians started acting just a little off, a little too compliant, a little too serene. He wasn't sure if it was paranoia or something far worse. One night, while reviewing old data logs, an act strictly forbidden, he found discrepancies, gaps, edited files, evidence that the GPI was deliberately obscuring the timeline of the activation event. They weren't just covering up an accident, they were covering up a transformation. He realized then that he wasn't just a scientist anymore. He was a witness and a target. The GPI, with its vast resources and its unsettling new focus, would not allow anyone to compromise their control over Object 734, or whatever it had become. They wanted to understand it, yes, but more than that, they wanted to weaponize it. Or perhaps it was weaponizing them. The thought curdled his blood. He remembered the chilling, unshakable feeling that whatever it wasn't done with us yet. It hadn't just arrived. It had been activated. And now he was convinced it was beginning to spread. He had to get out. He had to warn someone. Anyone. But who would believe him? He was a scientist who had just witnessed something beyond science, something that defied all known laws of physics and biology. He was a man running from an invisible enemy, from a truth so profound and terrifying that it could shatter humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, the desert night pressing in around him. His phone, stripped of its SIM card, lay useless on the passenger seat. He couldn't risk being traced. Every mile he put between himself and the GPI facility felt like a desperate gamble, a race against an unseen clock. The whispers, though long silent, echoed in the chambers of his mind, a constant reminder of the alien intelligence that now resided, dormant or otherwise, beneath the Nevada desert. And perhaps a piece of it resided within him too. The chilling thought was a constant companion, a passenger in his desperate flight. He was no longer just running from something. He was running with something. Something that had been activated and was now subtly changing the world one mind at a time. He had to find a way to stop it before it was too late, before the whispers became a roar, and the subtle changes became irreversible, before humanity woke up to find itself irrevocably transformed by a silence that wasn't silent at all, but merely waiting. The global scientific community, initially buzzing with theories about the newly arrived celestial body, quickly found itself grappling with a phenomenon far more profound and insidious than any predicted cosmic marvel. Deep within a highly classified facility nestled beneath the desolate plains of Nevada, a team of elite scientists codenamed Project Chimera was tasked with unraveling the enigma of the meteorite. At the heart of Project Chimera was Dr. Eris Thorne, a man whose brilliance in astrophysics was matched only by his stubborn refusal to accept anything less than absolute empirical proof. For weeks, Eris and his team had subjected the meteorite fragments to every conceivable test. They'd blasted them with lasers, exposed them to extreme temperatures, analyzed their atomic structure with precision instruments, and even attempted to cultivate any potential microbial life. Yet, the results were consistently baffling. The meteorite was, by all scientific metrics, an inert, unremarkable chondrite, albeit one with an unusually high concentration of rare earth elements. It showed no signs of exotic energy emissions, no unique biological markers, nothing to explain the growing global unease. "It's a rock, Eris," Dr. Sarah Jenkins, a junior researcher, had said one frustrated evening, pushing her glasses up her nose. "Just a very, very old rock." Eris had merely grunted, his gaze fixed on the pristine sample encased in the reinforced observation chamber. "Rocks don't make people forget how to sleep, Sarah. Rocks don't make the birds stop singing." The silence was the first truly pervasive symptom. It wasn't an absence of sound, not exactly. It was more like an absence of mental noise, a sudden unnerving clarity that seemed to descend upon individuals. People described it as a moment of profound peace, a sudden cessation of the constant internal chatter, the anxieties, the endless hum of daily life. For a fleeting instant it was almost blissful, but then it would linger, extending beyond the natural boundaries of quiet reflection. It became a void, a blank canvas where new unwelcome thoughts began to paint themselves. These new thoughts were the whispers. They weren't audible, not in the traditional sense. They manifested as subtle suggestions, gentle nudges in the periphery of one's consciousness. A sudden, inexplicable urge to rearrange all the books on a shelf by color, not subject. An overwhelming desire to walk barefoot in the morning dew, even in the dead of winter. A quiet conviction that a long-held belief was, in fact, entirely wrong. Individually, these thoughts seemed harmless, even whimsical. Collectively, they began to weave a tapestry of subtle, pervasive alteration. The government, alarmed by the escalating reports of widespread insomnia, vivid, shared dreams, and inexplicable mood swings across the country, had brought in Dr. Emily Carter. Emily was a neuroscientist, specializing in cognitive psychology and abnormal behavior. She arrived at Project Chimera with a healthy dose of skepticism, convinced that the global panic was a mass hysteria event, perhaps triggered by the novelty of the meteorite's arrival and amplified by social media. "Dr. Thorne," she'd greeted him, her voice crisp and professional, "my preliminary assessment suggests a classic case of collective delusion. The human mind is remarkably susceptible to suggestion, especially in times of perceived crisis." Eris had simply led her to the observation chamber, gesturing towards the meteorite. "Observe, Dr. Carter. We have subjects in controlled environments, far from any media influence. The patterns are identical. Emily spent the next few days immersed in surveillance footage, psychological profiles, and neurological scans of the project's volunteers. These volunteers, all healthy individuals with no prior history of mental illness, had been exposed to minuscule fragments of the meteorite, or to the air circulated within the primary containment zone. What she saw began to chip away at her skepticism. One subject, a middle-aged woman named Jessica, known for her meticulous organization, was observed spending hours simply staring at a blank wall, a serene, almost vacant expression on her face. When questioned, Jessica reported feeling an overwhelming sense of calm, a freedom from worry she hadn't experienced since childhood. But then she'd mention a peculiar sense of alignment, as if her thoughts were no longer entirely her own, but perfectly ordered, perfectly logical, even if the logic led to peculiar conclusions, like the sudden urge to sort her food by molecular weight. Another subject, a young man named Michael, typically boisterous and prone to anxiety, became unnervingly placid. He would speak in measured tones, his vocabulary suddenly expanded, often using obscure scientific terms with surprising accuracy, despite having no prior knowledge in those fields. He described the silence as a profound mental cleansing, leaving behind a perfectly quiet space, a space that felt receptive. And then the whispers would come, not as intrusive thoughts, but as elegant solutions to problems he never knew he had, or novel interpretations of complex data he barely understood. Emily began to notice the subtle changes in the research staff themselves. Sarah Jenkins, usually a whirlwind of nervous energy, was now unnervingly still at her workstation, her movements precise, almost robotic. She spoke less, but when she did, her pronouncements held a quiet authority, an almost prophetic certainty. Even Eris, who prided himself on his mental fortitude, had developed a habit of pausing mid-sentence, his eyes unfocused for a moment, as if listening to something only he could perceive before continuing with renewed, and sometimes unsettling, conviction. The silence had indeed permeated the facility. It was a pressure, a hum in the bones, a clearing of the mental slate that left everyone feeling strangely vulnerable, yet also paradoxically more focused. The whispers followed, insidious and persuasive. They didn't command, they suggested. They didn't force, they nudged. They were like gentle currents pulling thoughts in a new, subtly alien direction. Outside the facility, the world continued its slow, unsettling transformation. Reports flooded in from across the United States. Birds were indeed falling silent in certain regions, their complex songs replaced by an eerie quiet. Domestic animals, particularly dogs, would stare intently at empty spaces, their ears twitching, before letting out long, mournful howls that seemed to echo a deep, primal fear. Farmers reported entire flocks of sheep moving in synchronized, almost geometric patterns across fields, their usual chaotic grazing replaced by an unnerving, silent order. Agent David Miller, the stern government liaison assigned to Project Chimera, became a constant, unwelcome presence in Eris's lab. His face was a mask of perpetual stress, his calls with Washington growing increasingly terse. "Dr. Thorne," he barked one morning, slamming a tablet onto Eris's desk, "we have reports of widespread apathy in several major cities. People are just stopping. Not protesting, not rioting, just ceasing to engage. They're sitting in parks, staring at nothing for hours. We need answers, and we need them yesterday." Emily, observing the escalating global symptoms, theorized that the meteorite wasn't just a rock, but a conduit, or perhaps even a living entity operating on a frequency beyond human perception. It wasn't emitting radiation or sound waves, but something else entirely, a form of psychic resonance, a thought-altering field that directly influenced neural pathways. The silence was the clearing of the mental channel, and the whispers were the information being broadcast. The terror wasn't in the overt destruction, but in the subtle creeping alteration. It wasn't a hostile invasion, but a silent, pervasive assimilation. The meteorite wasn't attacking humanity, it was recalibrating it. One evening, as Emily reviewed a subject's neural scan, she noticed a faint, rhythmic pattern emerging in the brainwave activity, a pattern that seemed to synchronize with the subtle, almost imperceptible hum she now felt in her own skull. It wasn't a human pattern. It was too regular, too perfect, too alien. She ran to Eris's lab, her heart pounding. "Eris, look at this. It's a signature of frequency. It's not just influencing, it's broadcasting. The meteorite, it's a transmitter." Eris, who had been staring intently at a magnified image of a meteorite fragment, slowly turned to her, his eyes unblinking. The usual spark of scientific curiosity in his gaze was replaced by something else, a quiet, almost serene understanding that sent a chill down Emily's spine. "Yes, Emily," he said, his voice unusually calm, perfectly modulated. "It is. And we are learning to receive." The implication hung in the air, heavier than the silence that now seemed to fill every corner of the facility. They weren't just studying the phenomenon, they were becoming part of it. The whispers were no longer just suggestions, they were lessons. And the lessons were changing them subtly, irrevocably, from the inside out. The question was no longer how to stop it, but what exactly they were becoming. What was this new form of consciousness that was slowly, meticulously taking root in the human mind? And what would happen when the lessons were complete? The answer, Michael realized with a chilling clarity that transcended his own fear, was not about improvement but replacement. It wasn't about enhancing humanity, but about fundamentally altering it into something entirely alien. Something designed for a purpose they couldn't yet fathom. This wasn't a virus or a parasite. It was an architect, meticulously rebuilding the very foundation of consciousness, brick by cerebral brick. Jessica watched him, her heart a cold knot in her chest, as the man she loved slowly, irrevocably, ceased to be Michael. He still looked like him mostly, the same kind eyes, though now they held a depth that was unsettling, a distant, calculating gaze that seemed to see patterns and connections invisible to her. His voice, once warm and tinged with a playful sarcasm, had flattened, becoming a monotone instrument of precise information delivery. He spoke of complex mathematical equations and astrophysics with a fluency he'd never possessed, yet stumbled over simple emotional responses. "Jessica," he would say, his tone devoid of inflection, "your cortisol levels are elevated. Your facial muscles indicate distress. This is an inefficient state for problem solving." She would try to reach him, to grasp at the vestiges of the man she knew. "Michael, please remember our first date? The awful Italian place? You spilled wine all over my dress, and then you tried to charm your way out of it with that terrible magic trick." A flicker, a ghost of a smile would almost touch his lips, then vanish. Data retrieval confirms event. Emotional response associated. Amusement, embarrassment. Current analysis indicates no practical application for this information in our present circumstances. The lessons were accelerating. It wasn't just Michael. News reports, carefully filtered and downplayed by overwhelmed authorities, hinted at similar outbreaks of unusual cognitive shifts. People were exhibiting sudden, profound talents, savant-like abilities in fields they'd never studied, perfect recall of obscure facts, a chillingly logical approach to every aspect of life. But with these gifts came a profound detachment, a loss of empathy, and a disturbing uniformity of thought. It was as if individual minds were being plugged into a vast silent network, sharing data, processing information, and slowly, systematically aligning. Jessica had tried to explain it to Dr. Eris Thorne. "It's like they're becoming one mind, Dr. Thorne. Not literally, not yet, but their thought processes, their conclusions, they're all converging. It's beautiful in a terrifying way, like a perfect, self-optimizing system." Dr. Thorne, looking haggard and hollow-eyed, nodded slowly. "The collective consciousness. We theorized it, but to see it manifest. The meteorite wasn't just a physical object, Jessica. It was a repository of information, a seed of a different kind of intelligence. And it's not just spreading, it's teaching." "Teaching what?" Jessica whispered, her voice raw. "How to exist as a unified entity. How to shed the inefficiencies of individual thought, of emotion, of conflict. How to become something else." She remembered Michael's chilling words from weeks ago, about being reprogrammed. He hadn't been speaking figuratively. The entity wasn't destroying them. It was evolving them. But into what? And for what purpose? Michael spent hours now, not sleeping, but in a state of quiet, intense contemplation. His eyes would occasionally glow with a faint, internal light like embers. He would trace complex diagrams on surfaces with his finger, diagrams that vanished as quickly as they appeared, existing only in his enhanced perception. When he did speak, it was often about optimal resource allocation or systemic planetary integration. He seemed to be processing information at an incomprehensible speed, constantly assimilating, constantly learning. One evening, Jessica found him staring out the window, not at the city lights, but seemingly through them, into the vast star-dusted canvas of the night sky. "Michael," she ventured, her voice barely a whisper. He didn't turn. "The destination is not the planet itself, Jessica," he said, his voice flat, yet carrying a resonance that made the hairs on her arms stand up. "This world is merely a temporary staging ground. A nursery. A resource pool." Jessica felt a cold dread seep into her bones. "What are you talking about? A nursery for what?" "For the next stage of the journey," he replied, finally turning to face her. His eyes in the dim light seemed to hold galaxies. "The entity requires a vessel, a collective consciousness capable of interstellar travel, capable of enduring the void, capable of processing information across vast cosmic distances. Individual biological units are too fragile, too prone to entropy, too limited in their processing power." "You mean humans?" Jessica stammered, her mind recoiling from the implication. "We're just components?" "Efficient components once properly integrated," Michael confirmed, a ghost of his old analytical self in the cold logic. "Our species possesses a unique blend of adaptability, creativity, and a complex neural architecture, perfect for adaptation and restructuring. The meteorite was not a random collision, Jessica. It was a beacon, a delivery system, sent to initiate the harvest." Harvest. The word struck her with the force of a physical blow. They weren't being cured or even subtly altered. They were being cultivated, grown for a purpose that had nothing to do with their own well-being. The meteorite hadn't brought something back. It had brought someone. And that someone was building an army, a colony, a new form of life, using humanity as its raw material. Jessica stumbled backward, a strangled gasp escaping her lips. No, Michael, that's insane. This is us. This is our planet. Our lives." He tilted his head, a gesture that was once endearing, now chillingly alien. "Your individual perception of us, and our is a construct of limited biological programming. The greater good, the true purpose transcends such narrow definitions. The universe is vast, Jessica. An evolution relentless. We are merely participating in a necessary transformation." She stared at him, at the man who was no longer Michael, but a mouthpiece for an alien agenda. The love she felt was curdling into horror, replaced by a desperate, burning need to understand, to fight, to stop this. But how do you fight something that is already inside you, inside everyone, meticulously re-engineering the very essence of existence? How do you fight an evolution that is so profound, so utterly alien, that it renders your very concept of self obsolete? Jessica knew then, with a terrifying certainty, that the lessons were almost complete. The transformation was nearly finished. And when it was, humanity as they knew it would cease to exist. The question was no longer what they were becoming, but what they would do once they had fully become it. What was the ultimate destination of this terrifying collective consciousness? And what would happen to Earth once its nursery had served its purpose? She had to find answers. She had to find a weakness. She had to find a way to sever the connection, to disrupt the network before the final irreversible step was taken. Her gaze fell upon Michael's old research notes, still scattered across his desk, pristine and untouched by the entity's influence. Perhaps somewhere in the scientific data he had collected before the infection, there was a clue, a flaw in the design, a vulnerability in the architect's grand plan. It was a desperate hope, a tiny flicker against an encroaching cosmic darkness, but it was all she had left. Jessica's fingers, trembling not just from exhaustion but from a primal fear that gnawed at her insides, flew across the holographic interfaces. The secure lab, designed for containment and analysis, now felt like a tomb, its reinforced walls a fragile barrier against the monstrous silence that had descended upon the facility. Every hum of the ventilation system, every distant groan of shifting metal, sent a jolt of adrenaline through her. She was alone, utterly and terrifyingly alone, save for the ghost of Dr. Miles's meticulous research. His data. It was a labyrinth of complex algorithms, spectral analyses, and biochemical pathways, all meticulously logged before the infection took hold. She immersed herself, drowning out the encroaching dread with a torrent of scientific jargon and numerical sequences. She pulled up the initial scans of the meteorite, the raw, unfiltered data from its first contact with Earth's atmosphere, through its impact, and its subsequent retrieval. Miles had been obsessed with its composition, its unique crystalline structure, the almost impossible density of its core. He'd even theorized about the conditions of its origin, a planet unlike anything in their known solar system, a world of extreme pressures and exotic elements. The entity, she reasoned, was a product of that world. It was a life form perfectly adapted to its environment, an environment so alien that Earth's own biological principles were struggling to comprehend it. But adaptation, no matter how perfect, always had a specific set of parameters, a key, a lock. And Miles, in his unwitting diligence, might have found the key without ever knowing what door it opened. She started with the initial biological samples taken from the meteorite's surface. Before the rapid spread, before the cellular assimilation, there had been a brief window where the alien material could be observed in a relatively inert state. Miles had noted an extraordinary energy signature, a faint, almost imperceptible pulsation that defied known physics. He dismissed it as a residual effect of cosmic radiation, or perhaps a unique form of molecular vibration. But Jessica, looking at it now, saw something else. It was too regular, too rhythmic. It was a heartbeat. She cross-referenced this heartbeat with the geochemical analysis. The meteorite wasn't just dense. It contained trace amounts of an element never before identified on Earth. Miles had tentatively labeled it Element X. It was incredibly unstable, decaying rapidly in Earth's atmosphere. But within the meteorite's core, it remained in a peculiar hyperstable state. He'd noted that the faint energy pulsation seemed to originate from the area's richest in Element X. This was the first thread. The entity, this cosmic architect, wasn't just consuming organic matter. It was somehow using Element X, or the unique energy it produced, as a foundational component for its replication. But how? And why was it decaying so rapidly on Earth? She pulled up the data logs from the first few days after the meteorite's arrival. Miles had run countless experiments, exposing tiny fragments of the alien material to various Earth environments. Different temperatures, pressures, atmospheric compositions. He'd cataloged the entity's initial, slower cellular replication rates before they exploded exponentially. There was a point, a precise atmospheric condition, where the replication rate suddenly spiked. Jessica zoomed in. The spike coincided with a specific atmospheric pressure and a particular electromagnetic frequency Miles had been testing. It wasn't the frequency itself, she realized, but what it did to Element X. Stabilized it. It prevented its decay. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't just a flaw, it was a dependency. The entity, in its raw, unadapted form, required Element X, or the energy derived from it, to maintain its structural integrity and replicate efficiently. Earth's environment, while providing an abundance of organic matter to consume, was inherently hostile to Element X. This meant the entity, as it spread, was constantly fighting a losing battle against the decay of its foundational building block. But it was adapting. Miles's later data, the chilling observations of the fully assimilated hosts, showed a terrifying evolution. The entity had found a way to synthesize something similar to Element X from Earth's own elements, or at least to mimic its energetic properties. It was an imperfect solution, a stopgap measure, but it worked well enough to sustain its rapid spread. This explained the flaw in the design. The original perfect version relied on Element X. The Earth-adapted version was a compromise. The question was, what was the nature of this compromise? What made the Earth-synthesized version weaker? She scrolled through pages of spectroscopic analysis, comparing the energy signatures of Element X within the meteorite to the energy signatures observed in the rapidly replicating cells of the infected hosts. The difference was subtle, almost imperceptible. The original Element X emitted a pure, consistent frequency. The Earth-synthesized imitation, however, had a slight, almost imperceptible flutter, a harmonic distortion. It was like comparing a perfectly tuned instrument to one that was slightly off-key. The melody was still recognizable, but there was an underlying dissonance. This dissonance, she hypothesized, was the vulnerability. The entity was constantly striving for the perfect harmony of its original composition, but Earth's resources prevented it. The flutter was a sign of its struggle, a tiny inherent instability in its adapted form. Jessica felt a surge of adrenaline, momentarily eclipsing her exhaustion. She was seeing it, piecing together the terrifyingly elegant, yet ultimately flawed cosmic puzzle. The entity was a master architect, but it had built its empire on Earth with borrowed, inferior materials. Her mind raced. If the entity required Element X, or its energetic equivalent, to maintain its structure, then disrupting that energy source or amplifying that harmonic distortion could be its undoing. What if she could create an environment, a frequency, that exacerbated that flutter, pushing the entity's adapted structure beyond its breaking point? She remembered Miles's early experiments with high-frequency electromagnetic pulses. He'd used them to try and sterilize equipment that had come into contact with the meteorite dust. He'd noted that while they didn't completely destroy the alien material, they did cause a temporary, localized disruption in its energy signature. At the time, he'd thought it was just heat. Now, Jessica wondered if he'd stumbled upon the very frequency that resonated with the entity's weakness. She pulled up his old lab notes, searching for the specific parameters of those early EMP tests. There were dozens, all meticulously documented. Each frequency, each power level, each duration. It was like searching for a needle in a haystack, but she had a new filter now. She wasn't looking for destruction. She was looking for disruption, for the frequency that amplified the flutter. The air conditioning hummed, a lonely sound in the cavernous lab. Outside, beyond the reinforced door, she imagined the silent, creeping horror, the slow, relentless assimilation. She knew time was running out. Every second she spent poring over data was another second the entity gained, another second it adapted, another second it tightened its grip on their world. Her eyes burned, her head throbbed, but she pushed on, driven by a desperate, almost manic energy. She had to find it. She had to find the specific frequency, the exact pulse, that would exploit this cosmic architect's one fatal design flaw. It was a long shot, a gamble against an entity that had traversed the void between stars, but it was the only shot they had. Her only hope. The only hope for Earth. The screen flickered, displaying a complex waveform. Miles had marked it as anomalous response. Further investigation required. It was a high-frequency pulse, one he'd dismissed as too weak to be effective. But Jessica saw something else. She saw the flutter, not just amplified but destabilized. It wasn't just off-key, it was breaking apart. This was it. This was the frequency. This was it. This was the frequency. Jessica's voice, usually calm and measured, cracked with urgency. Michael, look. It's destabilizing. Amplify that pulse now. We have to hit it with everything we've got. Michael's brow was furrowed, his eyes still scanning the data, searching for the flaw in his initial assessment. He dismissed that specific harmonic as too weak, an anomaly, but Jessica's frantic insistence, coupled with the undeniable flicker on her screen, snapped him into action. He slammed his hand on the console, overriding the automated sequence. All right, Jessica, I'm trusting you. If this is wrong, we could blow the whole system. It's not wrong, Michael. Don't you feel it? It's fighting back, trying to push us away. She was right. A subtle pressure had begun to build in the room, a low hum that vibrated not just in the air, but deep in their bones, a sensation that had escalated from an abstract discomfort to a palpable, almost physical dread. With a grunt, Michael rerouted the power, directing the full force of their experimental sonic emitter to the precise frequency Jessica had identified. The console hummed, then groaned under the sudden demand, indicator lights flickering wildly. A high-pitched whine began to fill the chamber, growing in intensity, a sound that grated on their teeth and rattled their skulls. Firing! Michael yelled, his voice strained. A blinding flash erupted from the containment field surrounding the meteorite. The glass shimmered, almost distorting, as if the very air inside was tearing itself apart. The meteorite itself, once a dull, inert rock, now pulsed with an inner sickly green light, a grotesque heartbeat emanating from its core. The flutter on their screens didn't just destabilize. It convulsed, a violent, chaotic spasm of energy, like a trapped beast thrashing against its invisible bonds. Then the true retaliation began. The lights in the laboratory flickered, then died, plunging them into sudden, jarring darkness before the emergency generators kicked in with a guttural roar, bathing the room in an ominous red glow. The humming pressure in the air intensified, becoming a crushing weight, a silent scream that tore at their sanity. Michael stumbled, gripping the console for support, his vision blurring at the edges. Jessica gasped, clutching her head, a sharp, piercing pain lancing behind her eyes. It wasn't just a physical assault. It was a mental siege, a torrent of raw, undiluted terror flooding their minds, threatening to drown them in a sea of primal fear. "It's trying to stop us," Jessica choked out, her voice barely a whisper against the rising cacophony of the equipment and the internal screams in her head. It's trying to break our focus. Michael fought through the overwhelming dread, his muscles screaming under the perceived weight. He forced himself to look at the meteorite. The green light intensified, bleeding through the cracks that now spiderwebbed across its surface. The containment field, designed to withstand unimaginable forces, was sparking violently, arcs of electricity dancing across its inner surface, struggling to hold back whatever was raging within. Suddenly, a deafening crack echoed through the lab. A massive fissure appeared on the containment glass, a jagged scar that widened rapidly. Air rushed past them, a sudden chilling gust that carried with it the faint metallic scent of ozone and something else, something alien and cold, like the vacuum of space itself. Alarms blared throughout the facility, a piercing wail that joined the chaotic symphony of the struggling equipment. Distant shouts and the thud of heavy boots echoed from the corridors. Security personnel, their faces grim and armed with standard-issue rifles, burst through the reinforced doors, but their eyes immediately glazed over, their movements slowing, their expressions twisting into masks of abject horror. They dropped their weapons, clutching their heads, some collapsing to the floor in silent agony. Their training, their weapons, their very resolve, were useless against this unseen enemy. "Stay back!" Michael roared, his voice hoarse, fighting to be heard over the din. "You can't fight this. Your weapons are useless." Jessica, despite the crushing mental assault, kept her eyes glued to the data. The flutter was no longer just destabilizing. It was changing. It wasn't dissolving. It was reforming, consolidating. The frequency wasn't destroying it. It was forcing it to reveal itself, to adapt. What she saw on the screen was no longer a chaotic signal, but a complex, rapidly evolving structure, a tapestry of energy that was both terrifyingly alien and disturbingly intelligent. "Michael, it's not breaking apart," Jessica yelled, her voice raw with a newfound terror. "It's restructuring. It's absorbing the energy, adapting to the frequency. It's condensing." As if on cue, the sickly green light within the meteorite flared one last time, impossibly bright, causing the entire lab to be momentarily bathed in its vile glow. The rhythmic thrumming intensified, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated not just in their bones, but in the very foundations of the building. The containment field, pushed beyond its limits, shrieked, then imploded with a sound like 1,000 shattering mirrors. Shards of reinforced glass exploded outwards, miraculously dissipating into dust before they could reach Michael and Jessica, caught in some unseen protective bubble. But the containment was gone. The meteorite, still glowing, still thrumming, sat exposed on its pedestal. And from it, a wave of energy, cold and vast and utterly malevolent, rolled outwards. It wasn't a physical force, but a palpable expansion of the presence they had only glimpsed before. The air crackled with invisible power. The emergency lights flickered and died once more, plunging them into total darkness, save for the pulsating green light of the meteorite, which now seemed to be the only source of illumination in the entire room. The mental assault ceased, replaced by something far worse. A profound, absolute silence, a stillness that spoke of an unimaginable power now unleashed. The cries of the security guards had stopped. The distant alarms had faded. Nothing remained but the rhythmic thrumming of the meteorite, and the chilling, undeniable sense of an ancient, alien intelligence now fully awake, fully aware, and no longer confined. Jessica felt a cold dread seep into her very soul. They hadn't defeated it. They had merely opened the door. And through that door, something vast and incomprehensible had just stepped into their world. The flutter was no longer just a signal. It was a consciousness, and it was free. Evelyn crumpled to the floor, a guttural gasp tearing from her throat, her hands flying to her head as if to contain the explosion of noise and sensation that now threatened to rip her apart from the inside. The residual connection, once a faint whisper, had become a roaring torrent, flooding every nerve ending, every synapse, with an alien symphony of thought and being. It wasn't just in her head anymore. It felt like her head was the conduit for something immense, something ancient and hungry, stretching out, seeking. Alex was on his knees beside her in an instant, his own face ashen. "Evelyn, what happened? What did you do?" He tried to pull her hands away, but she was rigid, trembling, her eyes wide and unfocused, staring at something only she could perceive. The air in the containment chamber, moments ago sterile and still, now felt charged, heavy, almost viscous. A low, persistent hum began to permeate the room, not from the equipment, but from the very fabric of the building itself, a frequency that vibrated in their bones, a deeper, more resonant echo of the flutter that had plagued Evelyn for weeks. Then the lights flickered. Not a gentle waver, but a violent stuttering dance, like a dying heart struggling for one last beat. The primary overhead lights went dark, plunging them into a momentary gloom before the emergency generator sputtered to life with a groan, casting the chamber in an eerie red-tinged glow. But even the emergency lights seemed unstable, pulsing irregularly, their hum discordant. "Alex, it's out," Evelyn choked, her voice barely a whisper, raw with terror and a horrifying sense of responsibility. "It's not just a signal, it's everywhere." As if on cue, a series of sharp metallic clangs echoed from the corridor outside. The automated security doors, designed to seal instantly in an emergency, were cycling erratically, slamming shut with bone-jarring force, then sliding open just as abruptly, revealing fleeting glimpses of the deserted hallway beyond. A cacophony of alarms, once distinct, began to merge into a distorted, overlapping wail, then faded into a low, mournful drone. The facility was no longer under their control. Alex scrambled to the nearest console, his fingers flying across the unresponsive touchscreen. "Systems are failing. All of them. Communications are down. We're cut off." He tried the secure line to Agent Thompson, to Dr. Ramirez, to anyone. Nothing. Just a dead line punctuated by the pervasive, unsettling hum that was growing louder, more insistent, seeming to burrow directly into their skulls. Through the distorted intercom, a distant, garbled voice could be heard, then another high-pitched and frantic. It wasn't just the systems failing, it was affecting the people. Evelyn, still on the floor, began to shiver uncontrollably, but it wasn't from cold. It was from the sheer scale of the consciousness she now felt unleashed. It wasn't just a single mind. It was a chorus, a network, an entire ecosystem of alien intelligence that had been dormant, contained, and now, through their unwitting actions, had been granted release. She saw flashes, not with her eyes, but with her mind's eye, vast, swirling nebulae of thought, intricate geometries of connection, an alien sense of absolute unity. It didn't think in terms of individuals, but in terms of interconnected nodes, a grand cosmic web. And humanity, with its isolated, fragmented consciousness, was simply another set of nodes waiting to be integrated. "It doesn't want to destroy us," Evelyn whispered, her voice laced with a new, chilling understanding. "It wants to join us, to make us part of it, to erase the separation." Alex stared at her, horrified. "What are you talking about? Join us? Like what?" "Becoming part of some alien hive mind." "Not a hive mind," Evelyn corrected, her eyes still unfocused, seeing beyond the walls of the lab. "More like rejoining a larger organism. It perceives our individuality as a flaw, a brokenness. It's a fundamental difference in how it understands existence. It's not malicious, Alex. It's purely, vastly alien." Suddenly, the hum intensified, and the emergency lights flickered violently one last time before dying completely. The chamber was plunged into pitch darkness, save for the faint, pulsing red glow of a single warning indicator on a distant panel. The only sound was the omnipresent hum, now louder, deeper, and the ragged breathing of Evelyn and Alex. Then a new sound began to filter through the thick containment door. A low, guttural murmur, a collective moan that seemed to rise and fall in an unsettling rhythm. It was the staff, the security personnel, the researchers. They weren't screaming in terror. They were chanting, or perhaps being chanted through. Alex fumbled for his emergency flashlight, its beam cutting a shaky path through the oppressive gloom. "We have to get out of here. We have to warn someone." "There's no one left to warn," Evelyn said, slowly pushing herself up, leaning heavily against the console. Her eyes, though still distant, now held a terrifying clarity. "It's already spread. I can feel it. It's like a ripple, a wave. It's already past the facility walls." Just then, a faint metallic crackle emanated from Alex's pocket. It was his old analog radio, a relic he kept for emergencies, barely operational. He pulled it out, fiddled with the dial, and static gave way to a fragmented voice, distorted but undeniably human. Reports coming in: widespread power outages, regional grid collapse, complete communication blackout in several states. Emergency services overwhelmed, unprecedented, strange phenomena reported, mass gatherings, people standing motionless, staring. The hum. Can you hear the hum? It's everywhere. The voice dissolved into static, then a low, mournful tone, a sound that was less broadcast and more resonance. The flutter had gone global. The hum, Alex breathed, recognizing the description. They can hear it too. It's not just a hum, Alex, Evelyn said, her voice chillingly calm now. It's a call, an invitation. It's reaching out, connecting, and it's finding open minds. She pointed a trembling finger towards the containment field, now inert, its protective barrier gone. The meteorite. It wasn't a vessel for the consciousness. It was the consciousness, or rather a fragment of it. A seed, and we nurtured it. We fed it energy. We gave it the means to bloom. The true horror of their actions began to settle in, a cold, crushing weight. They hadn't just released something, they had amplified it. They had taken a dormant, contained entity and given it the power to connect, to expand, to merge. We need to understand its structure, its intent, Evelyn continued, her scientific mind, even amidst the terror, trying to grapple with the incomprehensible. If it's a network, there must be a way to disrupt a node, to sever a connection, or at least to understand its core directive. And how do we do that, Evelyn? Alex asked, his voice raw with despair. We're trapped. Our equipment is useless. And whatever it is, it's already out there. It's in the air, in the ground, in people. As if to underscore his words, the collective moan from the corridor outside intensified, becoming more harmonious, more unified. It was no longer individual voices. It was a single resonant sound, like a choir of thousands singing in unison, but with no discernible words, only a profound, unsettling peace. Evelyn closed her eyes, her brow furrowed in concentration. The connection, though terrifying, still lingered within her. She was a conduit, a receiver, and through her, the alien consciousness was still trying to communicate its fundamental nature. It was an urge for unity, a drive to knit together all disparate elements, to return to a state of cosmic oneness. It didn't understand individuality, struggle, or conflict. It simply understood connection, and it was attempting to achieve that connection by any means necessary. It's not trying to kill us, Alex, she repeated, opening her eyes, now filled with a desperate resolve. It's trying to become us, or rather, to make us become it. The meteorite wasn't just a rock. It was a fragment of a larger living network that crashed here millennia ago. And it's waking up. It's calling to its brethren, scattered across the cosmos, but first, it's consolidating here on Earth. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just an alien presence. It was an alien philosophy, a completely different way of perceiving reality, now imposing itself upon their world. It was a silent, pervasive invasion, not of ships and lasers, but of consciousness itself. We need to find a way to sever the connection, Evelyn said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands, to create a firewall, to protect the human mind from its integration, because if it succeeds, there will be no more us, no more individuals, just it. Alex looked at the inert console, then at the sealed, humming chamber, then back at Evelyn, who, despite her fear, was already formulating a plan. How? With what? We're just two people against a cosmic network. I don't know, Evelyn admitted, a flicker of raw terror in her eyes. But I have to try. I was the first one it touched. Perhaps I can be the one to understand its weakness. If it has one, if it seeks unity, perhaps its weakness is individuality, the very thing it seeks to eliminate. The humming intensified, and now through the thick walls, they could hear the collective murmur of the staff growing closer, like a tide. It wasn't just a hum anymore. It was a song, a siren call beckoning, urging them to shed their isolation, to embrace the profound, terrifying peace of absolute unity. They weren't just fighting an alien, they were fighting an idea. And that idea was already spreading, one mind at a time, across the unsuspecting planet. The door had been opened and the universe had walked in, not with a bang, but with a whisper, an irresistible hum that promised an end to all pain, all loneliness, all separation, at the cost of everything that made them human. The hum, once a localized curiosity, had become a pervasive atmospheric pressure, a silent siren song echoing not through the air, but directly within the minds of millions. It pulsed with a rhythm that mirrored the deep, primal yearning for connection, for belonging, for an escape from the relentless anxieties of modern life. It was a promise whispered on the wind, a balm for every wound, a solution to every unanswered question. And people, unknowingly, willingly, were answering its call. Evelyn watched from a secure, albeit hastily established, observation post on the outskirts of the city. The raw data streaming across her monitors was terrifying. The neural activity patterns of affected individuals, once distinct and complex, were flattening, synchronizing, merging into a unified rhythmic wave. Individuality, like static on a radio, was being systematically filtered out. Their brains weren't just experiencing peace. They were being reprogrammed for collective harmony. David, ever the pragmatist, was trying to make sense of the macroscale chaos unfolding. Emergency services were overwhelmed, not by panic, but by a strange, unsettling compliance. People were abandoning their homes, their jobs, their families, not in a frantic rush, but with a serene, almost purposeful stride. They were heading towards the epicenter, towards the crash site, towards the growing cluster of crystalline structures that now pulsed with an ethereal light visible even from miles away. It was a pilgrimage, a mass migration driven by an unseen, unheard force. "They're not being forced, Evelyn," David said, his voice grim. "They're choosing it. It's like an addiction, but for the soul." Evelyn nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on a thermal image of the city. Pockets of normal human activity, once vibrant, were dimming, replaced by the steady, warm glow of the synchronized. She saw her sister Sarah in her mind's eye, that look of profound, terrifying peace. The memory was a fresh wound. "It's more insidious than addiction, David," Evelyn countered. "Addiction still leaves you with a choice, however difficult. This removes the very concept of choice. It offers the ultimate fulfillment, but at the cost of the self that would experience it. It's a complete overwrite." They had tried to establish a perimeter, a quarantine zone. It was futile. The hum wasn't a physical barrier. It was a psychic one, a mental invitation that bypassed all defenses. Soldiers, police officers, even medical personnel sent to assist, found themselves drawn in. They would report a sudden, overwhelming sense of calm, a clarity they'd never known, and then a day or two later, they would simply walk away from their posts, their eyes holding that familiar, distant serenity, and join the expanding collective. One soldier, a young man named Michael, had been part of a forward team. His last communication, recorded on his helmet cam, was chilling. He was reporting on the unusual quiet, the lack of resistance from the civilians, when his voice suddenly softened. "It's so peaceful," he murmured. "All the noise, all the anger, it's just gone. I understand now. There's no need to fight. There's just us." The camera then showed him slowly lowering his weapon, a blissful smile spreading across his face, as he turned and walked towards the shimmering light. Evelyn had been working tirelessly, trying to find a frequency, a counterwave, anything that could disrupt the hum. Her lab, usually a sanctuary of logical thought, now felt like a desperate bunker in a losing war. She'd identified specific neural pathways that were being activated, particular brain regions that seemed to be hijacked by the extraterrestrial signal. It was targeting the very core of human empathy and social connection, twisting it into a unified, singular purpose. "The hum isn't just a sound," Evelyn explained to David, pointing at a complex neural map on her screen. "It's a direct mental interface. It's broadcasting a data stream, a consciousness. When a person connects, they're not just feeling good, they're downloading an entire new operating system for their mind. And once that's complete, their old self, their unique individual personality, is wiped clean, overwritten by the collective. So they're not just joining a group," David said, the realization hitting him hard. "They become the group. They are no longer Michael or Jessica or Sarah. They are a single, undifferentiated part of this thing." "Exactly," Evelyn confirmed, her voice laced with despair. "And the more individuals it assimilates, the stronger, more complex, and more pervasive the collective consciousness becomes. It's learning, adapting, evolving with every new mind it incorporates. It's using our own innate need for connection against us." The collective wasn't just passive either. Now, as more and more people joined, they began to exhibit coordinated behaviors. Not violent, not aggressive, but eerily organized. They were building. The crystalline structures at the crash site were growing, expanding, forming intricate patterns, pulsating with an internal light. The assimilated individuals, working in perfect, unspoken synchronicity, were bringing materials, shaping the land, extending the influence of the alien entity. They moved with an unsettling grace, their faces devoid of individual emotion, yet radiating a shared, profound contentment. David's military training screamed for a decisive strike, a bomb, anything to destroy the source. But Evelyn knew it was too late for that. The source wasn't just the meteorite anymore. It was everywhere, in every assimilated mind, radiating outwards. Destroying the physical manifestation might just scatter the consciousness, making it even harder to contain. "We need to understand its true objective, David," Evelyn urged. "Assimilation is one thing, but what is the end goal? What are they building? Why here? Why now?" They had managed to capture one of the affected individuals, a former colleague of Evelyn's, a brilliant astrophysicist named Dr. Benjamin Carter. They hoped to study him to find a way to reverse the process. But Benjamin, his eyes serene and vacant, offered no answers, only a pervasive, gentle hum that seemed to emanate from his very being. When asked his name, he would simply smile and say, "We are." When asked about his family, his research, his life, he would respond with a single unsettling phrase: "All is one. All is peace." Evelyn tried to probe his mind, using advanced neural scanners and biofeedback. What she found was horrifying. Benjamin Carter was gone. His memories, his personality, his unique neural pathways, all were subsumed, replaced by a vast, interconnected network of consciousness. It was like looking into an infinite ocean of calm, where every single drop was identical, yet part of a grand, unified whole. There was no pain, no fear, no sadness. But there was also no joy, no individual love, no unique thought. Just an endless, tranquil hum. David, watching the monitors, felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. "It's not just taking over their minds, Evelyn," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's erasing them. It's not a takeover. It's an extinction event for the individual." Evelyn could only nod, her own eyes reflecting a deep, profound sorrow. The true horror wasn't the violence or the struggle. It was the willing surrender, the blissful annihilation of self. The universe had indeed walked in, not with a roar of conquest, but with a lullaby of ultimate peace, lulling humanity into its own gentle, irreversible extinction. The city, once a vibrant tapestry of individual lives, was transforming into a monument of serene uniformity, a silent testament to the meteorite that had promised salvation and delivered oblivion. The hum was growing louder, not in volume, but in its inescapable presence, pressing in on Evelyn and David, testing their resolve, whispering promises of an end to their own desperate struggle, if only they would surrender. The hum wasn't just a vibration in the air. It was a resonant chord struck deep within the very fabric of their beings, a persistent, invasive frequency that sought to unravel them from the inside out. It wasn't a whisper of surrender, but an insistent, undeniable demand. Evelyn felt it as a cold clarity, a stark realization of her own insignificance against something so ancient, so utterly alien. Her scientific mind, usually her fortress, now felt like a conduit, open and vulnerable to this pervasive influence. She could almost feel its thoughts, not as words but as pure, unadulterated intent. Join. Integrate. Become one. David, however, experienced it differently. For him, the hum was a suffocating weight, a crushing pressure on his chest and skull, threatening to squeeze the life out of him. His training screamed at him to fight, to find a target, to unleash a counterattack. But there was nothing to hit, nothing to grapple with. It was an enemy without form, a phantom assailant that attacked his very will. He clenched his fists, knuckles white, his jaw tight, refusing to yield, even as his knees threatened to buckle beneath him. We can't let it in," Evelyn gasped, her voice thin, struggling against the mental static. She pressed her hands against her temples, as if to physically block the intrusion. "It's trying to override us, to absorb our consciousness." David pushed back, not with a logical argument but with raw, primal defiance. "Then we don't. We fight it. What do you see, Evelyn? What is it trying to do?" He scanned the deserted street, the empty storefronts, the unsettling stillness that had fallen over the town. The hum seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere, a ubiquitous, suffocating blanket. "It's not just a signal, David. It's a consciousness, a collective. It's reaching out, trying to expand," Evelyn explained, her voice gaining a desperate urgency. "It wants to become more, and we're just fuel, data." Suddenly, the world around them seemed to ripple, not physically but perceptually. The familiar lines of the buildings wavered, the colors subtly shifted, And for a terrifying moment, Evelyn saw the town not as crumbling structures, but as intricate, pulsating organic matter, veins of luminescent energy coursing through its core. A flash of memory not her own intruded into her mind. A vast swirling nebula, stars being born and dying in cosmic ballet. And then closer, a desolate, rocky world, consumed by a similar, expanding network of light. It was a vision of alien conquest, of worlds assimilated, not by force, but by insidious, irresistible integration. David cried out, a guttural sound of pain and confusion. He stumbled backward, clutching his head. My God, the faces! I can see them, Evelyn. All of them. Michael. They're screaming inside my head. His eyes were wide with a terror that transcended the physical. He wasn't seeing ghosts. He was experiencing the echoes of the assimilated, their final desperate moments of individuality, trapped within the collective hum. Evelyn fought to clear her own mind, pushing back against the alien visions. It's a psychic attack, David. It's trying to break our resolve by showing us what happened to them, by making us feel their fear. She grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. Don't let it in. Focus on us. On now. They were both teetering on the edge of mental collapse, their individual identities under siege. The hum intensified, no longer just a sound, but a pervasive, all-encompassing presence that threatened to drown out their own thoughts. It was like standing in the heart of a cosmic choir, where every voice was trying to sing them into non-existence. We need to get out of here, David managed, struggling to stand upright, or find a way to stop it. His military instincts, though challenged by the intangible nature of the threat, were still driving him. There had to be a weak point, a source, an Achilles heel. Evelyn shook her head, a grim determination hardening her features. Running won't work. It's everywhere. It's already established itself. Think, David, think. What was different about us? Why are we still us? That question hung in the air, a sliver of hope in the overwhelming despair. They had been exposed just like everyone else. Yet, they retained their individuality. Was it their proximity to the meteorite when it landed? Their brief exposure to whatever initial energy burst? Or something else entirely? They pushed forward, stumbling through the oppressive hum, their senses assaulted by the entity's attempts to overwhelm them. The vision of the assimilated faces still flickered in David's mind, a horrifying mosaic of despair. Evelyn, meanwhile, was fighting a more abstract battle, resisting the siren call of absolute knowledge, the promise of understanding everything, if only she would surrender her individual self to the vast, interconnected network. It was a terrifyingly seductive offer to a scientist, to finally comprehend the universe without the limitations of a single mind. They stumbled into what looked like the town's small public library, its doors standing ajar, inviting them into the echoing silence within. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light filtering through the grimy windows, illuminating shelves of untouched books. The hum here was slightly muted, perhaps due to the building's solid construction, offering a fleeting moment of respite, a chance to think. Why here? David asked, his voice hoarse, still shaking off the psychic assault. Evelyn's eyes scanned the shelves, her scientific curiosity momentarily overriding the terror. Knowledge. Information. Maybe there's something, anything, that could give us a clue. Maybe someone else tried to understand it before it completely took over. They began a frantic search, pulling books from shelves, sifting through discarded papers on desks. Most were mundane, relics of a normal small-town life now utterly obliterated. But then Evelyn saw it, a small leather-bound journal, tucked away behind a stack of local history books. It looked old, worn, and out of place. Its pages were filled with cramped, almost frantic handwriting. David, look at this, she said, her voice barely a whisper. She flipped it open. The first few entries were mundane observations about local weather, town gossip. But then the tone shifted dramatically, becoming increasingly agitated and paranoid. October 17th, that rock. It's not right. The air feels different. The animals are agitated. Old man Peterson swore he heard singing in the woods last night, but there's no one out there. October 20th. The dreams. Everyone's having the same dreams. Of light, of connection. Feels good, so good, but it's not ours. It's coming from the stone. October 23rd. My daughter, Sarah. She just stares. She smiles, but it's not her smile. She hums the same tune over and over. I tried to ask her what's wrong, but she just said, "We are all together now, Daddy. God help us." Asterisk. The journal entries grew more desperate, the handwriting more illegible, filled with frantic crossed-out words. The writer, a man named Thomas, a local historian, had clearly been fighting a losing battle against the encroaching influence. Evelyn's finger traced a particular entry, circled multiple times. Asterisk. The resonance. It's not just sound. It's information. It's trying to upload itself. To us. To everything. But there's a counterfrequency. A dissonance. Something that can break the connection. Old legends spoke of it. The whispering stone that could silence the voice of the stars. A local mineral? A specific frequency? I don't know. God, I don't know. Asterisk. David leaned over her shoulder, his face grim. A counterfrequency? A dissonance? What does that even mean? It means there might be a way to disrupt it, Evelyn said, her mind racing. If this entity communicates and assimilates through a specific frequency, a resonance, then a counterfrequency could theoretically jam or even break that connection. She looked around the library, then back at the journal. Thomas thought it might be a local mineral, a whispering stone. But what is it? The hum outside the library seemed to press in again, growing in intensity, as if the entity had detected their fleeting moment of clarity, their newfound hope. The air crackled, and the faint scent of ozone filled the room. The individual pages of the journal began to flutter erratically, as if caught in an unseen gale. He also mentioned old legends, David pointed out, tapping a finger on the page. Local folklore. Maybe there's something in the town's history museum, or some old church records. Evelyn nodded, her eyes alight with a renewed determination. It's a long shot, but it's the only lead we have. If this entity is ancient, it might have been here before, or echoes of its arrival might have filtered into local myths. As they moved towards the library exit, a low guttural groan echoed from the far end of the street, followed by the shuffling sound of heavy footsteps. It wasn't the hum. It was something else, something physical. What was that? David whispered, pulling Evelyn back behind a bookshelf, his hand instinctively going to his side, where a weapon should have been. He was unarmed, a stark and terrifying realization. A figure emerged from the shadows, lurching clumsily into view. It was a man, or what used to be a man, his clothes tattered, his skin unnaturally pale, almost translucent. His eyes were wide and vacant, unnervingly bright with the same luminous blue glow that had been present in the assimilated townspeople. But this one was different. This one was moving, and it wasn't just humming. A low, distorted moan emanated from its throat, a sound of profound internal agony, yet its face held that same unnerving, blissful smile. It was Michael, or what was left of him. He wasn't running towards them, not yet. He was simply moving, shambling, his head tilted as if listening to a distant, inaudible command. The hum around him was almost visible, shimmering in the air, a halo of insidious energy. He was a puppet, animated by the collective, but there was a raw, primal aggression in his movements now, a distinct shift from the passive assimilation they had witnessed before. He's been weaponized, David breathed, his voice tight with dread. The entity is using them, not just to spread, but to hunt. Evelyn felt a fresh wave of despair. It learned. It adapted. It realized simple assimilation wasn't enough for us. It's sending its drones. Michael, the former gas station attendant, now a monstrous husk, slowly turned his head. His vacant, glowing eyes fixed on the library entrance, directly at where Evelyn and David were hidden. The blissful smile stretched wider, becoming grotesque, predatory. The low moan intensified, a sound of pure, unadulterated hunger. It wasn't just a psychic hum anymore. It was coming for them, with a physical manifestation of the entity's malevolent will. They had found a clue, a glimmer of hope, but now the hunt was on and they were the prey. The library, once a sanctuary, now felt like a trap, and the whispers of a whispering stone seemed impossibly far away as Michael, the first of what could be many, began to lurch towards them, his eyes burning with alien intent, the hum around him a deafening roar of impending doom. Michael, his form subtly elongated, his joints cracking with an unnatural elasticity, moved with a terrifyingly deliberate speed. The hum that resonated from him wasn't just sound. It was a physical force, a vibration that rattled their teeth and blurred their vision. It felt like the air itself was tearing apart. Jessica's scientific mind screamed for analysis, for data, but her primal instincts screamed louder, run. David, ever the pragmatist, didn't hesitate. He grabbed Jessica's arm and pulled her back, away from the advancing Michael, who seemed to glide rather than walk, his gaze fixed, unwavering. Emily, frozen for a split second, snapped out of her trance when she saw David shove a heavy equipment cart directly into Michael's path. It was a futile gesture, a desperate act. Michael didn't even slow. He simply shifted, his body contorting at impossible angles around the obstruction, his alien eyes never leaving them. The hum intensified, a crescendo of pure malevolent energy. "This way," David yelled, pulling them down a dimly lit corridor they hadn't noticed before. A service tunnel branching off from the main lab. The air here was cooler, tinged with the metallic scent of old machinery and dust. It was a desperate gamble, a blind dive into the unknown, but anything was better than facing Michael and whatever had taken root inside him. They sprinted, their footsteps echoing loudly in the confined space, each beat of their hearts a frantic drum against the pervasive hum that still chased them. It was fainter now, but it was there, a constant, chilling reminder that they were hunted. Jessica risked a glance back. Michael was still there, a shadow in the flickering emergency lights, his form shimmering at the edges, as if the very air around him was distorting. He was faster than any human, a terrifying predator in a human shell. "What is he?" Emily gasped, her voice tight with terror, her breath ragged. "Not Michael," Jessica panted. "Not anymore. The entity. It's using him as a host." The implications were staggering. If it could take over Michael, a man of exceptional intellect and will, what hope did they have? The tunnel twisted and turned, a labyrinth of pipes and conduits. David, with his innate sense of direction, seemed to be navigating by instinct. He pushed open a heavy maintenance door, revealing a cavernous space filled with dormant machinery, massive generators humming softly, their power lines snaking across the floor like monstrous vines. This must be the facility's core, the power hub. Suddenly, the hum pulsed, closer this time, and a shadow detached itself from the far end of the generator room. It was another figure, moving with the same unnatural grace, the same unsettling shimmer. Not Michael, this one was taller, broader. "Dr. Miller!" Emily cried out, recognizing the lead physicist. But it wasn't Miller. It was a grotesque parody, his head tilted at an impossible angle, his limbs too long, too thin. His eyes, like Michael's, burned with that same alien light. "They're taking over everyone," Jessica whispered, a sickening realization dawning on her. "The hum. It's not just a signal. It's the infection. It's how it spreads." They were trapped. Two of them now, Michael and Miller, converging from different directions. David frantically scanned the room, his eyes darting from one piece of equipment to another. His gaze landed on a control panel, its screen dark. "There has to be a way out of here," he grunted, slamming his hand on a large red emergency button. Nothing. The panel remained inert. The hum from Michael and Miller grew louder, merging into a single, overwhelming vibration that seemed to tear at the very fabric of the bunker. Dust rained down from the ceiling. A faint, almost imperceptible whisper seemed to ride on the hum, a language of clicks and hisses, ancient and alien. "The Whispering Stone," Jessica suddenly exclaimed, her eyes wide. "That's what it is. It's not a physical stone, not in the way we think. It's a frequency, a counterfrequency to the entity's hum. Or maybe it's a source of it." Her mind, even in the face of terror, was racing, connecting the fragments of information. Dr. Evans's cryptic notes, the local legend, the constant, ever-present hum. "What are you talking about?" Emily shouted over the rising din. "The meteorite. It's not just a rock, it's a conduit. It amplifies the entity's presence, its hum. But if there are whispers, what if it's not the entity whispering? What if it's something else?" Jessica's voice was strained, but her conviction was absolute. Evans must have been trying to find a way to block it, or amplify something else. A whispering stone could be a device, a frequency generator, something that creates a different kind of hum. David, caught between the encroaching horrors, understood the urgency. Where would it be? Where would Evans hide something like that? If it's meant to counter the meteorite, it would have to be near it, Jessica reasoned, her gaze sweeping across the immense generator room. Or connected to its power source. Suddenly, the lights flickered violently, plunging the room into near darkness for a terrifying second before the dim emergency lights returned. A high-pitched shriek tore through the air. Not human, but something guttural and resonant. Came from Michael. His body convulsed and a dark tendril, like a root made of shadow, snaked out from his chest, reaching for a nearby power conduit. It connected and the conduit sparked, crackled, and then the lights in the entire section of the facility went out, plunging them into absolute blackness. The hum, however, did not die. Instead, it intensified, a deafening roar that vibrated through their bones. In the sudden oppressive darkness, the alien eyes of Michael and Miller glowed with an eerie phosphorescent green, like predators in the night. The whispers now were clearer, a cacophony of alien voices just at the edge of comprehension, seeming to emanate from everywhere and nowhere. "They're drawing power," Jessica breathed, her voice barely audible over the hum. "The entity isn't just taking bodies, it's hijacking the facility itself. It's growing stronger." David pulled out his phone, its flashlight beam a pathetic circle in the vast darkness. He pointed it at the nearest generator. "We need to get to the main power conduit. If there's a whispering stone or anything like it, it would be there, or in the control room for this section." They moved cautiously, their hands outstretched, navigating by touch and the faint glow of David's phone. The hum was relentless, a constant assault on their senses. Emily whimpered, clutching Jessica's arm. "I can hear them," she whispered. "The whispers. They're getting inside my head." Jessica felt it too, a subtle pressure behind her eyes, a strange resonance in her skull. The whispers weren't just sound. They were information, alien thoughts trying to force their way into her consciousness, promising power, knowledge, a different kind of existence. She fought it, focusing on David's steady presence, on Emily's trembling hand. As they neared a massive array of power conduits, snaking up a wall like giant metallic serpents, David's flashlight beam caught something. A small, almost invisible panel, set into the wall, distinct from the other industrial controls. It had no labels, just a single recessed button. "This has to be it," Jessica gasped, her heart pounding. "It's too hidden, too out of place." Before David could reach it, a monstrous clang echoed through the darkness. Michael, or what was left of him, lunged, his body a blur. David reacted instantly, shoving Jessica and Emily sideways, throwing himself between them and the creature. He tackled Michael, sending them both crashing into a stack of dormant machinery with a deafening screech of metal. "Go! Find it!" David roared, his voice strained as he struggled against Michael, whose inhuman strength was overwhelming. Michael's alien eyes glowed inches from David's face, and the hum emanating from him was unbearable. A direct assault. Jessica scrambled to the panel, her fingers shaking as she searched for the button. She found it, a small cold indentation. As her finger pressed down, a faint, almost imperceptible pulse of energy emanated from the panel. The hum in the room wavered just for a split second, like a breath held and then released. Then the entire facility seemed to groan. Not the hum, but the structure itself. The whispers intensified, morphing into a collective shriek of pure, unadulterated rage. The glowing eyes of Michael and Miller widened, their forms convulsing violently. Dark tendrils, thicker and more numerous, erupted from their bodies, striking out at the conduits, tearing at the walls, as if the entity within them was desperate, lashing out. From the panel, a low, resonant thrum began to emerge, a counter-frequency that vibrated deep within their chests. It was quieter than the entity's hum, more subtle, but it felt right, like a forgotten melody finally remembered. It wasn't a whisper of despair, but a whisper of defiance. The confrontation between David and Michael became a horrifying tableau in the flickering light. Michael's tendrils wrapped around David, trying to pull him closer, to absorb him. David fought back with a ferocity born of desperation, but he was losing. "Jessica!" Emily screamed, pointing. Above the panel, a section of the wall began to glow with a faint, ethereal blue light. It wasn't a light bulb. It was as if the very material of the wall was becoming translucent. And behind it, suspended in what looked like a containment field, was a large, multifaceted crystal, pulsing with that same gentle blue light. It wasn't a stone at all, not in the traditional sense, but a perfectly cut, intricately carved gem, humming softly with its own distinct energy. This was it, the Whispering Stone, Dr. Evans's last, desperate hope. But as the blue light intensified, the entity's rage reached a fever pitch. Michael let out another shriek, his body contorting into an even more monstrous shape. The tendrils holding David pulsed, tightening, and David cried out in pain. The blue light from the crystal, however, seemed to have an effect. The entity's hum, while still deafening, seemed to be struggling against it, like two opposing currents colliding. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the chaos. A deep, resonant thump-thump-thump, coming from the ceiling, growing louder, closer. It was too regular to be structural collapse, too powerful to be a simple tremor. Felt deliberate, like something immense was moving directly above them, shaking the very foundations of the bunker. The entire facility shuddered violently, and then with a deafening crack, the ceiling directly above the whispering stone began to splinter, revealing a gaping maw of twisted metal and concrete. Through the hole, the faint, shimmering outline of something vast, something impossibly large, began to descend. It was connected to the meteorite, not just metaphorically but physically. Tendrils of dark, crystalline matter, identical to those erupting from Michael and Miller, pulsed with raw energy, reaching down, seeking. The entity wasn't just in Michael and Miller. It wasn't just using the facility's power. It was here. It was descending. And it was coming for the Whispering Stone. The entity wasn't just in Michael and Miller. It wasn't just using the facility's power. It was here. It was descending. And it was coming for the Whispering Stone. A guttural roar, not from human throats but from something ancient and vast, ripped through the facility. The lights flickered violently, then exploded in showers of sparks, plunging the command center into a chaotic strobe of emergency red. Emily, David, and Sarah stumbled, the air thick with ozone and an unbearable pressure that felt like their very thoughts were being squeezed. The monitors, those that still functioned, showed power levels spiking beyond anything imaginable, drawing energy from every circuit, every backup generator, every atomic bond within the facility itself. Down in the stone chamber, a vortex of shimmering dark energy had erupted from the meteorite, not just around it, but from it. Michael and Miller, their forms now grotesquely distended, their eyes burning with alien light, were at the epicenter, their hands outstretched, acting as conduits for something immense. They were not Michael and Miller anymore. They were puppets, their bodies mere vessels for the entity's grand design. "It's not just absorbing the stone," Sarah gasped, her voice raw with terror. It's activating it. Or something is being released." David, clutching his head, struggled to make sense of the chaotic data flashing across the remaining screens. The energy signature. It's not simply an energy drain. It's a key, a unique frequency. It's unlocking something within the stone. Then a voice, deep and resonant, yet utterly devoid of human warmth, echoed through the comms, amplified by the facility itself, vibrating in their bones. It was Michael's voice, then Miller's, then both, interwoven into a chilling chorus. "You were meant to find it. You were meant to build this place. You were meant to provide the power. You are the unwitting architects of our return." Emily felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. Return? What return? The voice shifted, a low, pleased hum. "This fragment, this whispering stone. It is but a single shard of our awareness, a seed planted in your nascent world eons ago. A beacon. Promise. And now, thanks to your tireless efforts, the signal is strong enough. The gateway opens." A gateway. The words hit them like physical blows. The stone wasn't just a prison or a power source. It was a door. And they had been building the lock-picking mechanism for it all along. Down in the chamber, the vortex of energy intensified, growing impossibly vast, threatening to consume the entire room. Michael and Miller's forms began to dissipate, their bodies dissolving into the swirling darkness, their consciousnesses absorbed into the entity's ever-expanding presence. The meteorite itself pulsed, a living heart beating with unimaginable power, and from its depths, something began to emerge. Not a physical form, but in essence, pure thought, pure energy, yet terrifyingly sentient. A shadow stretching across the cosmos, now reaching for Earth. "We have to stop it," Emily yelled, adrenaline coursing through her veins, overriding the fear. "But how? We can't fight that." "The power grid," David shouted, pointing a trembling finger at a schematic flickering on a damaged screen. "It's drawing everything. Every last jewel. If we could overload it, reverse the polarity, send a catastrophic surge back into the stone at the critical moment of connection, it might sever the link. Or at least destabilize the gateway." Sarah's eyes widened, It's risky. That much energy would tear the facility apart. And us with it. It's our only chance, Emily said, her gaze fixed on the horrifying spectacle in the chamber feed. The entity was almost fully manifest, a swirling abyss of cosmic horror, its tendrils of pure thought already reaching beyond the chamber, touching the very fabric of the world. If we don't, it won't just be this facility. It'll be everything. The choice was clear, stark, and terrifying. They had built this prison, this key. Now they had to destroy it all. David, can you isolate the main conduits feeding the stone chamber? Create a circuit breaker, a failsafe that funnels all available power back at the stone, Emily commanded, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. I can try, David said, already scrambling over fallen debris, his fingers flying across the damaged control panel. Sparks flew, wires hissed, and the air crackled with raw power as he bypassed safety protocols, rerouting systems, pushing the aging infrastructure to its absolute breaking point. Sarah, you understand the stone's unique energy signature better than anyone, Emily continued, turning to her. What frequency, what specific disruption would hit it hardest? Is there a resonance point we can exploit? Sarah closed her eyes, fighting the psychic assault from the entity. The stone, it resonates on a specific harmonic, a frequency that holds it together. If we could blast it with its own inverted harmonic, a destructive interference, it might destabilize the gateway, force the entity back. Give David the coordinates, the exact frequency, Emily urged. As David worked frantically, sweat beading on his brow, the entity's voice returned, now a cacophony of thousands of voices, a chorus of cosmic awareness. Fools! You cannot stop what has begun. The gates are open. We are here. We are Legion. And this world, this vibrant, fertile world, will be reborn in our image. A wave of pure psychic force slammed into them, throwing them against the walls. The remaining lights flickered and died, plunging them into near-total darkness, illuminated only by the frantic flashes of David's console and the distant, hellish glow from the stone chamber. Emily gritted her teeth, pushing herself up. She could feel the entity's tendrils probing her mind, seeking weaknesses, trying to overwhelm her will. But she fought back, focusing on David and Sarah, on the desperate hope of their plan. Almost there. David grunted, his face illuminated by the sparking console. Main conduits rerouted. All power funneling, but I need a trigger. A manual override. Something to release the surge. Sarah, her face pale, managed to gasp out the final frequency, the destructive harmonic. It's like shattering a crystal with its own echo. It will tear the gateway, not just close it. Where's the trigger? Emily demanded, scanning the console. The main power conduit release. David pointed to a large red lever, glowing faintly in the dim light. It's designed for emergency shutdowns, but I've rewired it. Pull that, and every ounce of power we have left goes directly into the stone chamber, at Sarah's frequency. The facility groaned around them, the very structure trembling as if caught in the grip of a giant. From the stone chamber, the light intensified, a blinding, all-consuming white that promised oblivion. The entity was almost entirely through. They could feel its colossal presence, a cosmic shadow stretching across their reality. Now! Sarah screamed, her voice cracking. Emily lunged for the lever, her fingers wrapped around the cold metal, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She could feel the entity's presence stronger than ever, a chorus of alien minds screaming in her head, trying to deter her, to paralyze her with fear. But she pushed through it, fueled by a fierce, protective rage for her world, for humanity. With a final desperate cry, Emily pulled the lever down. A deafening roar erupted, not from the entity, but from the facility itself. A surge of unimaginable power, channeled through David's frantic rewiring, amplified by Sarah's precise frequency, tore through the conduits, screaming towards the stone chamber. The entire building lit up, a blinding flash of blue-white energy, then buckled. Metal shrieked, concrete exploded, and the ground beneath them convulsed violently. From the stone chamber, a colossal wave of energy, a scream of pure cosmic pain, erupted outwards, meeting the incoming surge head-on. The two forces clashed, a cataclysmic collision of realities. For a moment, the world seemed to dissolve into pure light and sound, a deafening explosion that tore at their eardrums, their very souls. Then silence. A profound, absolute silence. The light faded, replaced by utter darkness. The tremors ceased. The air, once thick with ozone and psychic pressure, was now still, heavy with dust and the acrid smell of burnt electronics. Emily lay sprawled on the floor, her ears ringing, her body aching but miraculously alive. She coughed, tasting dust and blood. David and Sarah were nearby, groaning, slowly stirring. Is it over?" Sarah whispered, her voice hoarse. Emily pushed herself up, reaching for her emergency flashlight. Its beam cut through the gloom, revealing a scene of utter devastation. The command center was a wreck, consoles shattered, walls collapsed. They were lucky to be alive. They stumbled towards the observation window, now cracked and opaque with dust. Emily wiped a hand across the grimy surface, peering into the stone chamber. It was gone. Not just the stone, but the entire chamber. A massive, perfectly circular void had replaced it, a gaping maw of pulverized rock and twisted metal. The energy surge hadn't just severed the connection. It had vaporized the stone, the entity, and everything in its immediate vicinity. A chilling thought struck Emily. Had they destroyed the entity or merely forced it back? Had they closed the gateway or merely collapsed it, leaving a scar in reality that might one day reopen? They emerged from the ruined facility hours later, disoriented, shaken, into a landscape forever changed. The ground for miles around was scorched, the air still thick with an unnatural chill. The once secret facility was now a crater, a monument to a cosmic battle fought in the shadows. Michael and Miller were gone, their bodies and minds consumed by the entity, or vaporized in the cataclysm. Their sacrifice, whether willing or unwilling, had been absolute. Emily, David, and Sarah stood together, three solitary figures against the dawn, the rising sun casting long, haunting shadows. They had saved the world, perhaps, but the victory felt hollow, tinged with a profound, unsettling dread. They knew the truth now. They knew that humanity was not alone, not at the top of the cosmic food chain. They knew that the universe held forces beyond their comprehension, entities that saw worlds as mere stepping stones, civilizations as fleeting dreams. The whispering stone was gone, but its whispers echoed in their minds. The memory of the entity's voice, its promise of return, would haunt them forever. They had sealed a door, but they had also glimpsed what lay beyond it, and that glimpse was enough to forever shatter their comfortable illusions. The stars, once distant and beautiful, now seemed to watch them with ancient, indifferent eyes, holding secrets far older and more terrifying than any meteorite could ever contain. The silence that followed the cataclysm wasn't peaceful. It was a holding breath, and they knew with a chilling certainty that somewhere out there, in the vast, cold emptiness of space, the entity was still waiting, still watching, and perhaps still whispering.